Wide Vancouver. Jeff Patterson and Irfaan Ghaffar with you as the offseason is officially underway. The players and the management group met with the media on Thursday at Rogers Arena. And now we're heading to the first weekend without hockey here in Vancouver for a long time. It is the offseason, but the games stop, but the talk doesn't. And news as we record this on a Friday afternoon, we'll get to all the player availabilities. And there was a lot to chew on and a fair bit that was said at the rink on Thursday. But Canucks making a little bit of news, and we'll get to that in a moment. But just first things first, Rink Wide Vancouver, a presentation of the Applewood Auto Group. And right now at Applewood Infinity Richmond, you can get the 2024 QX60. You can lease it at 0.99% for 24 months on all trims, or the 2024 Q50 lease rates from 1.99% for 24 months and non-stack cash of $4,000 on all trims. News had been out there for a little while about Jeremy Colleton and his future out in Abbotsford. He's gone after 2 years. And an old friend and an old face, Manny Malhotra, coming back. And this is fascinating on a couple of levels to me. His kid is committed to Chilliwack in the BC Hockey League, so there was incentive from the family standpoint, but also for Manny, who's been an assistant coach here in Vancouver and also in Toronto for the last 4 years, climbing the ladder, that coaching ladder, taking on a head coaching role in professional hockey for the first time in his career.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great for Manny. I mean, I think it was a little bit of a demotion this year for him, for the Toronto Maple Leafs. He wasn't on the bench this season with the Leafs. He was up in the sky, the eye in the sky, doing the coaching and talking to people down on the bench from there. So a great opportunity for Manny. I mean, he's a guy that's beloved by a lot of people in this organization and this city and this fan base. But like you just mentioned, Jeff, yeah, definitely moving up on the coaching ranks, and Caleb playing in Chilliwack, the Malhotra family now, obviously some royalty out in those parts of our province.
They're taking over the Fraser Valley. Look out. Again, there's familiarity, and it's always such a people business, and you connect the dots that way. But, another indication of the Canucks doing business sort of under the radar here. It didn't leak. They were able to announce it here. And it's fascinating to me. I mean, Manny played with Daniel and Henrik Sedin on the 2011 Cup team. We know the injury that he suffered. But here are the Sedins who spend a lot of time shuffling between downtown Vancouver and out in Abbotsford. So there's already a synergy in place and a familiarity in terms of getting Manny up to speed on what's in the organization. He was here under Travis Green, so he'll be familiar with some of the faces. But, when you're working in Abbotsford, it's generally a youth movement. You're dealing with guys that have just turned pro and are working their way through the ranks. So going to be fascinating to see what he can do in terms of his touch to help develop guys. And, as we move along here, like Jeremy Colleton, good for him. This is a guy that's coached in the National Hockey League, wanted to get back there, and that's understandable. And he put in 2 solid years out in Abbotsford. Look at Nils Höglander became a 24-goal scorer in the National Hockey League after spending a year with Jeremy Colleton. Arshdeep Bains, undrafted free agent, makes it to the National Hockey League. And I think Jeremy Colleton fingerprints all over that one. To a lesser degree, Linus Karlsson and Vasily Podkolzin and Nils Amon, guys that have touched Abbotsford and want to be full-timers in the National Hockey League. But, ultimately, coaches in the AHL are no different than players. They want to get back to the show. And for Colleton, we'll see where it goes. But ultimately, the Canucks just said, hey, we couldn't wait around to see if Jeremy Colleton was going to land some sort of NHL work. So they elected to move off him and thank him for his years of service, his 2 years. And in comes Manny Malhotra. So, I think Colleton did a nice job. And I'm not surprised that, he was probably, I don't want to say too young, but when he got the job in Chicago, he was young, the youngest head coach in the National Hockey League. I'm sure he's better for his time in Abbotsford and learning about himself and, again, about developing players. And it's going to be interesting to see where he lands for next season and beyond.
No, absolutely. And I think just circling back to Manny, Jeff, you look at it and, you mentioned the Arshdeep Bains, the Nils Amon, the Nils Höglander. This next generation, though, that's coming up, right? Jonathan Lekkerimäki, you've got Deep Petey, you've got a lot of young prospects, Tom Villander. You've got a lot of long prospects coming in, and it's, they're going to need some time in that professional setting in Abbotsford before they make the jump to the National Hockey League. And, you've covered this team for a very long time, as have I, guys that have come and played with Manny. Manny's a coach. Manny's always been a coach. Manny's a guy that even after faceoffs or even after games when he was playing, he would work on faceoffs at practices. He'd work on faceoffs with guys and things like that. So definitely a really positive thing for the Canucks organization. As you mentioned, they kept it pretty quiet. So a tidy piece of business for this Friday, let's say, for them.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned some of those guys that you did, whether it's DPD or Atu Ratu, Cole McWard. These are guys that the organization still very much believes in, and guys that they have brought in either through drafting or through free agency. And now it's about turning them into full-time National Hockey Leaguers. And it was interesting to me to see Game 7 against Edmonton earlier in the week. Who's lining the back row of the press box, but all of those guys, the Black Aces, they brought them in because they wanted them to get this experience. No, they didn't get to play in Stanley Cup playoff hockey, but the next best thing for all of those young players to be in that atmosphere, that environment, to see that building and feel that building, and to fuel their desire to be a part of it on the ice. So all those guys were there for Game 7, and some of them traveled and were part of the traveling group for the Vancouver Canucks. But those are the pieces that Manny Malhotra is going to have to work with. And the other thing too is we'll see what he does about rounding out his staff and who's brought in to help him there. But again, that's an area that the Canucks have focused on. They've spent on is player development. And so now Manny Malhotra is the guy sort of at the top of the chain out in Abbotsford. Really looking forward to seeing what he can do as a head coach in the American Hockey League. This is I don't want to say a special edition of Rink Wide because we don't really have any formal plans, but we'll continue to pump out content as we go here through the off season. And, if you have questions for us that you'd like us to address or answer on a future episode, by all means, hit us up the Great Clips chat line, all of our feedback channels on all the social medias that are available to you. They're there on the screen if you're watching. And by all means, whether it's, off season, draft related, next year, fire away, and we'll compile questions as we go here through the off season, and on future episodes we'll certainly get around to some of your submissions as part of the contributions to this program. The Great Clips chat line, a presentation of Great Clips with more than 4,400 hair salons throughout the United States and Canada. Great Clips, the world's largest hair salon brand, the official hair salon of the National Hockey League. For more information, check them out online, greatclips.com. All right, that kind of leads us into what we heard from Patrick Allvin and Rick Tocchet. They were at the back end of the media availability. We'll touch on the players a little bit later, but for me, we've heard from the players. Yes, we got a couple of items of news about injuries and those types of things, but otherwise, in the aftermath of a Game 7 loss to the Edmonton Oilers, some pretty emotional guys earlier in the week. They've had some time to process it. I thought there were some things said there, but we haven't heard from Patrick Allvin through this playoff run at all. He has stayed out of the limelight, and and that's where he likes to be. But I have to commend him. And I wrote a piece at Canucks Army that basically said, I liked the tone of what I heard from the general manager. I thought he had a presence of the microphone. I think he's getting more comfortable every time that he has these media availabilities. And again, they're probably not the favorite part of his job, but I really felt he had a presence. And just to come out firing right off the top, not happy, not satisfied, only the second round, the standard has been set here. I kind of thought he really set a tone for the offseason as players filter out of town now, to take with them that, all right, the GM means business. And when we reconvene in the late summer into the fall, everybody knows that the general manager's not happy. 7 wins. It was great. It was a fun run for a month, but 7 wins isn't 16 wins. And there's going to be some other team that's hoisting the Stanley Cup when all is said and done, and it's not going to be the Vancouver Canucks.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jeff. I think for so long, this organization making the playoffs and losing out in the round, or just missing the playoffs, they were okay with being mediocre and celebrating mediocrity. That wasn't the tone of Patrick Allvin at that press conference. He meant business. And I think that was not a shot, but that's a message to his players. The second round isn't good enough. If we can make it to the second round, it's my job to provide Rick Tocchet and his staff with better players and give players different teammates so they can go to the next step and take that next step. So I liked what he said. I liked the way that he went out and handled his business. You mentioned he's a guy that kind of shies away from the limelight a little bit, for sure. But when he's out there, more comfortable. And I think that for him, he knows what his job is. He knows where the areas of improvement are and where they desperately need to improve on and what they want to get, and what their targets are. He flat out said, scoring winger. If we can get one, let's go get it. right? So you know that they're going to do some sort of business here in the offseason. The question is how much and how different this team looks come training camp next season.
Yeah, there were a few things that he got into as well. And you hear it every year from general managers around the National Hockey League, improvement from within. Yeah, they want to keep all of their free agents. And as you said, and then he said a top six winger and a little bit more speed. Now, I think it's important too, because when he laid that as a baseline that they're not satisfied and they understand the standard has been set, running it back with the same group isn't going to necessarily lead to improvement. Like a lot of guys had career best seasons. I don't know that you can bank on all of that. There's also salary cap issues. And, he touched on that and recognized, when he was asked, like, what's the biggest challenge of the offseason? And he said, like, filling out a roster with 23 players because, they've got a little bit of money to play with, but obviously, and people know the names, the unrestricted free agents, the restricted free agents that they've got to deal with, they have to decide. They got to prioritize ultimately. And, as we sit here right now, Quinn Hughes, Carson Soucy, and Noah Juleson are the only three defensemen that are under contract for the Vancouver Canucks for next season. So as much as Patrick Allvin recognizes he needs help up front, you're not going to go into next season with three defensemen. So they have to round out a National Hockey League blue line as much as they have to address some of those areas of needs up front.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's been a knock on this team for a couple of years now, the defense. And we kind of saw it get a little bit better and take its shape, this season with guys like Philip Hronek and Tyler Myers having an absolute insane season for him and then a monster in the playoffs. Some of his best hockey he's played in his career. You and I talked about it on so many episodes after games on Rink Wide. And then, Ian Cole, what's going to happen there? There's a lot of interesting question marks when it comes to this defense. But is it something that is it going to be a big splash? Are they going to re-sign Philip Hronek? It's different things that they need to do, or do they think someone can emerge from within? And that's one of the things that, Rick Tocchet's going to look at. And I'm sure when they have their meetings together, as they discuss into this summer about the direction of this team and where they want to go. But for sure, the flashy, sexy forwards and the speed is great, but you got to stop pucks from getting into your net as well.
All right. We'll kind of reverse engineer this because we will get to what the players had to say. But Elias Pettersson, forthcoming to a degree and admitted, I was bothered by a knee injury. Basically, from the All-Star break on, there were issues there. We all watched. We all speculated that there was something. And, to his credit, he copped to the nature of the injury. But I was fascinated by the response of Rick Tocchet particularly, who was like, we didn't think about sitting him down. Got to play through things. And Patrick Allvin talked a little bit more in depth about understanding that this is a unique talent and that, yes, they've got to figure things out here. But he also, I thought, and I don't know if it was harsh, but also said something at the tail end of that same answer about, learning to play through things. And, this is what it takes now. And to use the first half of the season to prepare for the back half of the season and those types of things. Like, I didn't feel like the coach and GM gave their star player a ton of leeway when they were asked about him on Thursday afternoon.
Well, I don't think they should, right? And I think for so long, we've done so many post-game shows, playoffs and regular season, and 40 was the big, topic of conversation. And I just think the frustrating part with the fan base is they've seen so much from him and that talent is there and they know it and they're waiting for it to explode. But Elias Pettersson, even when he went out and did that press conference before the game, before the scooter ride that he took around the city to try and clear his head a little bit, he just kind of looked dejected, right? And I think it was a little bit of the same thing here when the Canucks had their post-game media availabilities. He's a guy that we all know he's a little bit different. He keeps to his own. He doesn't want to make excuses for himself, but he's the only guy that really revealed something. Right. He's the only guy that said he was playing through something. And I think that when you're the coaching staff and you're the management, it's a little bit different when you hear that and have to go out and have to explain kind of what was going on and things like that. It changes the tune a little bit.
I said it earlier, we don't hear from Patrick Allvin day in, day out the way that we do from Rick Tocchet. So I was far more interested, I suppose, in what the general manager, he's the architect, the buck stops with him and President Jim Rutherford. But I did think there was a fascinating answer from Rick Tocchet, who had a couple of days now to digest the Game 7 loss, was named NHL Coach of the Year in the interim. So, hats off to Rick Tocchet for that. But was asked, basically, you tried to defend your way to wins in game 6 and 7 and it blew up in your face. Like,
Yeah.
do you have to assess the approach to the way that this team is going to play? And I was quite refreshed to hear him say, yeah, like, we do, like, as coaches and for this team to get better, the status quo is not going to be enough. It's not going to be enough in the roster, but also in the way that they want this team to play. He recognizes that in the end, you got to score some goals. They did it well early in the season, but something changed midstream. And so it'll be interesting to see, what the focus is for Tocchet and the coaching staff in the offseason. Said that he didn't necessarily think that they needed a power play coach per se, but wasn't, he didn't close the door on it outright, but he was asked that question. But I thought it was interesting at least to hear him say, yeah, there's certainly room for growth as a coach and just fundamentally the way that the Vancouver Canucks are going to approach the game next season.
Yeah, and I think that, that's a coach being a coach and realizing that they had a great first start to the regular season and then they, tailed off a little bit. And then in the playoffs, yeah, you get to game 7 of round 2 with one win away from going to, the Western Conference final, and you come out flat. Now, defending your way through the series is probably not the ideal way to win games, but it's shots, it's doing other things, but it's also a point of, he puts on the ice what's given to him, Jeff. And so many times we've seen, coaches look at their team and say, okay, maybe this isn't the roster that I wanted assembled. This is what I have to play. I have to play what's given to me. So for Rick Tocchet and Patrick Allvin, I can't imagine there's going to be 2 days that go by where they're not talking. They're not looking at who to target, how they can improve, of what they're able to do. I think the blueprint for the structure of how they want to play, and Rick Tocchet's fingerprints are all over that. It's about Jim Rutherford and Patrick Allvin going to be able to find those players to implement it into his system.
Breaking down what we heard from the general manager, the head coach, we heard from a number of players. Brock Besser meeting with the media and filling us in on some of the details around the blood clotting. Thatcher Demko for the first time in weeks. We heard from the Canucks #1 netminder, Tyler Myers, Nikita Zadorov. We'll get into all of that as we carry on here on a Friday afternoon heading to the weekend. It is Rink Wide Vancouver, a presentation of the Applewood Auto Group. We've all heard of the overdose crisis, also known as the toxic drug crisis. But did you know that it affects men disproportionately? Last year, 78% of people dying here in BC were men, and the majority were 30 to 59-year-olds. It's not easy to struggle with addiction, and the stigma around it can make it harder for people to reach out for help. But there is help and support available. Every journey is different, and the thing that helps might not be the same for everyone. So when someone does reach out, be compassionate and have open, non-judgmental conversations. We here at Rink Wide Vancouver want to be part of the solution. If you or someone you care about is struggling, you can find supports and services near you at helpstartshere.gov.bc.ca. You can also watch powerful real-life stories of recovery on the Help Starts Here website. Jeff and Irf with you here. It is Rink Wide Vancouver, a partial presentation of the fine folks at the Vancouver Canadians. And we've finally had some spring weather, hopefully more, and then into summer, obviously. And I hope people are going to get out to the Nat. Now that the Canucks are done, you can turn your attention to baseball and sunny day out at Nat Bailey Stadium. Seas are on the road right now, but they've got a 6-game homestand starting on Tuesday, May 28th, which includes a superstar appearance on the 28th, the nooner at the Nat on Friday, May 31st, and a family fun Sunday on June 2nd. Of course, Father's Day in the offing. Great way to spend day with dad. Take him out to the ballpark, catch fireworks, giveaways, Friday nooners, and superstar appearances all spring and summer long. Get your tickets at 604-872-5232 or go to CanadiansBaseball.com. All right, Irf, we heard from the players. Let's start with Petey again. We touched on it a little bit there, but, again, told us that he was battling through something with the knee and then was asked what he was most looking forward to. And he just basically said, skipping town, getting out of here, getting out of Dodge, clear his head. And it has. There's been a lot for him to process, obviously, this year. The contract, the lack of production. So, it's going to be there was so much speculation last offseason about the contract. That's not the issue. I think for him, it's just going home and sort of figuring out who he is, how does he get back to being a star in this league, and if it doesn't necessarily start the way he wants, is he prepared to deal with what's going to come his way?
Well, regardless, on July 1st, he's going to be a happy man as he cashes in on a ridiculous signing bonus. So we'll start there. But I mean, look, I think I don't know what people wanted to hear from Elias Pettersson. Like if they wanted to hear that he was battling some sort of wild injury that we didn't know, and he did admit something. He admitted that his knees were bothering him. Okay, well, knees don't help you skate, right? You need your legs to skate. You need your legs to shoot the puck. You need your legs for a lot of things when it comes to playing hockey. He still had 5 hits. He was throwing his weight around in the final game. But I think the biggest thing for him is really that, Jeff, and it's getting his mind right. It's skipping town. It's clearing your head. There was a lot of noise around Elias Pettersson, but the only person that is going to be able to get himself out of what he's feeling is Elias Pettersson. And I think that when you look at that, for him to be able to leave town here in the next couple of days, if he's not already gone at the time we're recording this, just get away. Be with those that help you and elevate you, and then get back to work. This is going to be a long summer for you. What everyone was saying in Vancouver about you throughout the entire second half of the season, basically from the All-Star game forward. Like, you need to come in and be that guy for the entire season. This team depends on you. And it was evident because of the contract that they gave him. So it's going to be a big summer. I mean, for a guy that thinks the game so methodically and, puts a lot of stock into how he feels mentally going into games, this is going to be a big summer for him.
I think my biggest takeaway from Thursday at Rogers Arena for the final time this hockey season was just seeing Brock Besser smiling at the podium. Honestly, like, I didn't know if we were going to have access to him. I didn't know sort of what his physical condition was. Obviously, he couldn't play Game 7. He talked about how crushing that was, but just seemed to be in great spirits, said that, this isn't anything that's going to hamper him, really even in the short term. Blood thinners, they're going to monitor it, but it's not going to affect his offseason training, all of that. But he just seemed to be in such a good mind frame that, for a guy that was told earlier in the week that he couldn't play, but then he even said with a smile, I asked if I could play Game 7, but the risks were too great there. But he just seemed to be in a good place, and so I was delighted to see that for Brock Besser.
Yeah, I mean, look, I like Brock, and I think that he's been a guy that has always been very easy to deal with within the media, and always makes himself available, holds himself accountable. He talked after Game 6, knowing what was going on and the possibility of what could happen in Game 7. So you tip your cap to a guy like him. You got to feel for him, right? What his offseason training is going to look like. I know he said he can skate and do things, but how physical can he get? He didn't play in the Beauty League last season. I wonder if that's going to hamper his plans this season as well as what he's going through. So it's something to take seriously if you're him, as his training regimen probably changes a little bit here. But again, non-career threatening, non-life threatening. That's something that we have to keep, hampering down. That Brock Besser will be back, as a member of the Vancouver Canucks, but it just depends on, how the offseason training goes and what version of him we're going to get. The 40 goal score was incredible. That was one of the best stories of this season, Jeff, in my opinion, for this Vancouver Canucks team. But it'll be interesting to see what Brock Besser comes back when things kick off in October.
Yeah, and the other guy that I was interested to hear from was Thatcher Demko, and curious to see how much he was willing to enlighten us on what he went through. We didn't get a lot in terms of the nature of the injury or the connection from the one injury to the other, but he too expressed, I think his quote was something along the lines of hardest thing that he's had to deal with as a player. Said he was close, and we watched him. I was there on the morning of Game 7. Like, he put in a shift with a few of the Black Aces. There was no holding back. Like, to the eye, you could see he was close. And he confirmed that had they advanced, who knows? Like, we may have seen him be ready for Game 1 against the Dallas Stars. We'll never know because they didn't advance. But, pretty emotional. Again, like, this is a guy that's played 3 hockey games in the last, 2.5 months with 2 separate injuries to the same knee. He was asked questions about his body betraying him. He was asked questions about, capping his workload and those types of things. He didn't really want to go down that road, said that that's not his decision ultimately. But, the organization going to have some decisions to make here about, how do they advance? Is it a tandem of Demko and Shilovs? If so, what is the division of labor there? I've made it clear here on this program before. Like, I do think that they should look at a cap for him of, somewhere around 50 games. Like, it's way more important to have a healthy Thatcher Demko, your ace, ready to go in game number 1. Now, he was ready for Game 1. It's just that he wasn't available for game 2 or beyond. But, I do think that's one thing that, like, for all the great things that he has shown in his ability as a goaltender in the National Hockey League, he hasn't shown the ability to stay healthy in any of the last 3 years. And so, there's going to have to be some discussions and decisions on the hockey club's part. I'm curious about his training here in the offseason, how he approaches all of that. They got 2 years left at an incredibly team-friendly deal of $5 million. If he's on his game, can absolutely be a difference maker. So, it's going to be wild to kind of see where it goes from here for Thatcher Demko.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you got to feel for him as well, right? He is their ace, as you mentioned. He's a guy that wants to play. He's a guy that, is pretty emotional up there. And it was an emotional time for him, just trying to get back to health. I mean, look, there's one thing of being able to go and skate and putting in a shift just before game 7, as with Ian Clark and everyone else that he was working with. But it was another thing for him to take that step and just actually get back onto the ice after the first initial injury. So he made a lot of strides. I mean, we'll never know, obviously, as the Canucks didn't advance. But again, another interesting summer here. How much time is he going to spend on the ice, getting into game shape? And how much time is it going to be him strengthening, obviously, the knee and having it ready for what could be a long playoff run or what they hope is a long playoff run? But I agree with you, Jeff, to your point, like no more than 55 games, 50 maybe if you're Thatcher Demko.
Yeah, no, 55 now seems on the high end here.
Yeah.
But let's see. He's got to, get through the summer, come back healthy, and we'll see where it goes and ultimately see who his running mate is. But it's hard to imagine that Artur Silovs hasn't, punched his ticket now to being a full-time National Hockey League, or at least as a backup to Thatcher Demko. We heard from all the pending free agents. They all talked about how they want to be here, and that's fine until offers are put in front of them and they realize that there's money on the table elsewhere. And, I don't think they're going to run it back with the entire roster. But from anybody else, obviously Nikita Zadorov, anytime you get him in front of a microphone, he's gold. He was again. And clearly, just has it out for the province of Alberta. Even though he played there, getting his shots in. Anything else that jumped out from you from any of that group of pending free agents? We can keep Filip Hronek in a separate category here if we want to get into that. But from the other guys, anything that stood out from you from what you heard?
I mean, Dakota wanting to be here, it's no secret. It's pretty evident. I think that, money is going to talk, Jeff. That's going to be the biggest thing, right? You look at the guys that are their unrestricted free agents, Elias Lindholm, Dakota Joshua, and you have Tyler Myers and Nikita Zadorov. Nikita Zadorov's ask is probably going to be 6x6. Don't think the Canucks are going to do that, right? There was an offer that the Canucks did make. I believe it was 4.5 over 4 or 5 years. So the Zadorov camp did turn that one down, but it's a conversation that they're going to have. How much do you value it? And I know the fan base and everyone is so excited about this big hulking defenseman that was a monster in the playoffs. Recency bias is a thing. Right? We can't get lost in that. You have to look at the big picture. You have to look at how old he is. And in year 4 or 5 of that contract, okay, the Canucks may advance to the Stanley Cup final. It could all be worth it. But again, when the cap is going to go up, so it could be the Canucks positive, but you just have to be careful with that. Dakota Joshua, this is his first big NHL contract. This is the first time where he's going to go into the free agency and be wanted by teams. Or teams like Chicago could make a run at him, pay him upwards of $4 million. I'm not sure the Canucks are going to be able to do that, right? So he's going to have options. And the big one is Elias Lindholm, right? That's the big one around the National Hockey League, the one that every single person is talking about. Yes, the Canucks are going to make a run. They're going to talk to him. They're going to have a conversation. That it's been reported that the Canucks, different players have made a pitch to try and convince Elias to sign in Vancouver. Well, you know what, Jeff? There has to be an offer, and that offer has to be in the same ballpark as what Elias is looking for from different suitors, because there are going to be a bunch. He's a guy that's a monster in the playoffs. I get it. He didn't have a good regular season, but he has had that capability of being a number 1 center on a good National Hockey League team. From Vancouver's perspective, are you really going to pay your third line center $7.5 million a year? I'm not entirely sure they do that. And that's where the problem is. So it's going to be an interesting time for those 3 guys for sure. But another one, it's RFA. And that's Filip Hronek. So we'll see where that one goes. As you mentioned, we'll keep that one on its own.
All right. We'll talk about Hronek in a sec here. But before we do that, I know that as we've gone here Rink Wide through the playoffs, we would check in with you on lines of the night before games, and then we come back and look in on them afterwards for Bet365. We want to take a little bit of a different tact here. Now the Canucks are no longer playing, but what have you got your eye on here in this segment presented by Bet365?
Well, it's interesting. It's obviously brought to you by Bet365, proud partner of the Harrison Price Canucks conversation, and yes, us here at Rink Wide Vancouver. You open an account with Bet365 and bet on a huge range of markets. So whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Use the code VANBONUS. I went back and looked before the season started. The Vancouver Canucks to make the playoffs on Bet365 was plus 1,000. So you could have made yourself a lot of money if you did that. For the Canucks to win the division, Jeff, was plus 2,000. So you could have made yourself even more money. Now, just looking ahead into next season, the Canucks might, the Edmonton Oilers are probably going to be up there as well, the Vegas Golden Knights, but the Canucks might be the number 1 or 2 favorite in this division if they go and, retool their team a little bit, or if they can somehow come back as constructed to be that exact team. Their odds for the Stanley Cup won't be anywhere near the bottom as they have been in so many years past when you look at it and as bookmakers make these odds. But an interesting time for the Vancouver Canucks, especially when it comes to the betting lines moving forward.
Yeah, and Patrick Elvine touched on that, and I do think it's a really important context to keep in mind here that, the defending Stanley Cup champ, Vegas Golden Knights, and they're done. They were out in the first round.
Yeah.
They were a wild card team. There were 4 teams in this division well over 100 points. Now, the Canucks were a surprise, but, the Los Angeles Kings aren't going anywhere.
Nope.
They're going to be heard from as well. They've got a ton of talent there. So you need to see the rosters, obviously, before you can start to sort of handicap these races. But, just the evolution. The Oilers, as long as they got McDavid and Draisaitl and Evan Bouchard playing the way that he's playing, they're going to be a factor in this division for a while. The Canucks want to believe that they're the real deal here and starting something. Again, the Kings and the Golden Knights, just the way they operate, they're always going to be competitive. And so they've got decisions to make and players that are going to come and go. But the Pacific was absolutely stacked this year. So be fascinating to see once we get through free agency and rosters are assembled, how the Vegas odds makers look at the Vancouver Canucks and their chances for next season. All right, Philip Hronek, look, I'm a little surprised as much has been made of what happened. I asked the guy a question. I didn't think he tried very hard to answer it, quite frankly, and I pushed back a little. Nowhere in the media handbook, Irf, you've done this for a while, you've been in those scrums and the press conferences, there's nowhere in the media handbook, there isn't actually a media handbook, that says you can't push back on an answer. And this is a guy that didn't do media all season long, but the minute he took his place at the podium with a microphone on what's essentially a media day, he had to know some questions were coming. The role that he plays on this team, his contract ask, all of those things. He hasn't been asked about any of them all season long. And so, Drance tried to ask a question about heading to restricted free agency. I didn't think he gave Thomas a great answer. I tried to ask about the 2 halves of his season, and his response was something along the lines of, if I knew, I would have corrected it. Sorry, I expected a better answer, quite frankly. And that's why I pushed back. It wasn't about the injury, even though lots of people that were in that locker room saw his arm taped heavily for practices and games. I do think he played through something, but that's fine. Ian Cole didn't want to talk about injuries. Quinn Hughes didn't want to talk about injury. So the injury part was not it. It was that, I asked about the production level in the first half as compared to the second half. And he said if he knew an answer, he would have changed it. Well, somebody better know an answer and change it. Otherwise, the Canucks don't want to pay $8 million for a guy that's going to produce at the level of a $3 million player. Something did change. He stayed with Quinn Hughes through the second half of the season, and yet his production dropped off considerably. And in the playoffs, until he scored the final goal of Game 7, there wasn't a sniff of offense from him. So, did he overcook in the first half of the season? Yeah, probably. He probably wasn't as good as his numbers were up until Christmas. He's probably a better player than he was in the second half, but where did the offense go? He didn't want to shed any light on it. I just thought, it's not about me. I didn't lose any sleep over the fact that he tried to stare me down and stuff. But, I would think that fans, if they had the access that we do, would have asked the same type of question. What went on in the second half of the season? So that's where I was coming from, is that I just thought he could have worked a little harder to come up with a better answer. Whatever was said was said. I thought it was interesting, though, that Farhan followed up with a question about playing with Quinn. And I want to believe that he recognized that he had two earlier questions and didn't do a lot with them. I thought he gave Farhan a decent answer. Maybe he just likes Farhan more than me, but who knows?
Yeah, I mean, look, even Patrick Allvin, just to start with this, Patrick Allvin did say that, one of the reasons why they played together a lot was Quinn and Philip liked playing together, and that was their number one pairing. But as you mentioned, Jeff, if you're going to look at a guy where the ask is $8 million a year, you got to, like, Elias Pettersson came and did media, and in that series, and he hadn't put up a point at all. I understand. Some guys like it. Some guys don't. Some guys are really good at it, and some guys aren't. Philip Roenick probably falls into the latter of that category. That's not a knock on him as a person. It's not a knock on him as a player or anything like that. It's just answer the question, to be completely honest. And I think that, when you look at it from your point of view, you're asking a question based on what you've seen and heard and want to know from what the fan base has seen and heard from Philip Roenick all season long. The production in the first half of the season was unbelievable. A lot of them had crazy production, but it's the lack thereof and the accountability that a lot of these guys are really good at holding themselves accountable for. JT Miller, fantastic at it. Elias Pettersson, yeah, he's pretty good at it as well. Brock Besser, Quinn Hughes, all of those guys you can lump into that group. Even, Tyler Myers as well. The leadership core group of those guys. If you're Patrick Allvin, and you're looking at this and this contract negotiation that's about to come up. Yes, I understand he's a restricted free agent, but $8 million is a lot of money. His comp is Damon Severson, and that's nowhere near $8 million a year. The Canucks offered between $52 and $54 million for Philip Roenick, and I'll sit here and I will say that is the right offer. Maybe he can squeak out, and him and Alan Walsh can squeak out a little bit more from the Vancouver Canucks, but if it's anywhere up to $7.5 million, you have to really, and it's not moving either way, you have to consider other options if you're the Canucks. And I think that, we're not saying that's happening right now or any of that. They're going to have talks. It's going to happen here over the next little while. But, that's why you hear the talk now coming out from different cities of different players and different packages and things like that, because he's a pretty polarizing figure, both on the ice and off the ice, obviously, as we can all see. But it's gonna be a fun next few months for sure for Philip Roenick.
Yeah, and look, he doesn't like to do media. That's fine. Nobody. Yeah. It wasn't like we followed him around the rink and out to his car and demanded answers. And people gave him his space, and so I just thought he knew what he was getting himself into on the final day of locker clear out and everything else. And it just would have been nice to get a little bit more insight from the player himself, but whatever, he'll go his separate way for the summer, and we'll see if he has a change of heart or decides, who knows if he's back next year. I mean, like if he signs a big ticket here in Vancouver, he's probably going to have to do some media the day that he signs the contract. That's kind of the way the game works here. But you're right. And one of the beauties of all of this, of playing into the second round of the playoffs and playing to the Victoria Day long weekend, is that you get to the third week of May. Like, we're a month from the draft. We've been conditioned in this market to having all of April and all of May and most of June while other teams have the fun of the playoffs. Not this year. The Canucks got through 2 rounds. It wasn't enough in the eyes of Patrick Allvin, but it certainly burns off some of this offseason that, it's a month before the draft. Now, they don't have a first or a second rounder, so this year's draft, right now, not nearly as intriguing as some in years gone by. And I'm sure we'll hear those same things we always do about them, trying to trade back into the draft and recoup picks and all of that kind of stuff. But as it sits right here, right now, no first rounder, no second rounder. So it's going to be a while before, they won't even get up onto the stage. They're going to, second day of the draft from their table at the back of the floor there in the Sphere. But it'll be a while from, unless things change, before we hear from the Vancouver Canucks at the NHL draft in June. Rick Tocchet was named coach of the year this year. I asked him after the thing broke off yesterday. I was just like, how do you find out? Like, do you get a phone call from the league? And he's like, Patrick told me, but then he made me swear to secrecy. So I guess he had learned the day before. Obviously, Quinn is up for the Norris. That's one of the awards that will be handed out at the award show the day before the draft down in Vegas. Elias Pettersson up for the Lady Byng. We learned yesterday that Patrick Allvin in the running, one of the finalists for General Manager of the Year. That's going to be announced, I think, on June the 10th. So, the news cycle is not going to stop here. Again, the season comes to an end, but there's a lot of work to be done. Allvin laid all that out. We've chronicled it here on this pod. And so we'll pop up from time to time. A reminder to follow and subscribe. If you don't want to miss the latest content from us here at Rink Wide, hit the follow button, subscribe to our programs. And of course, we look forward to any and all feedback on our social channels. If you've got questions, we'll do our best to come up with answers on future Rink Wide podcasts. But no real schedule here. It's kind of as is, as the need arises. But we won't go entirely dark either. We'll continue. I mean, hey, we have fun talking hockey, and there's always something to talk about with the Vancouver Canucks. But I think we'll leave it there for this episode. For Irf, this is Jeff. We've got Jacob behind the scenes, helping out Mike as well. So we thank them as we did all season long. Irf, good to catch up with you here. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll see what next week brings.
Always good to catch up, my friend. Yeah, enjoy the weekend, and I'm sure we'll chat with you and our listeners soon.
All right, that's going to do it for this episode of Rink Wide Vancouver, a presentation of the Applewood Auto Group.
Thanks for watching this video. For more great content from Canucks Army, check out Sakaris and Price, Rink Wide Vancouver, or our show, Canucks Conversation. We're your one-stop shop for interviews, breaking news, and a live Canucks postgame show hosted by Jeff Patterson.